But there are also elements such as the Equality Act that require specific elements of training to be delivered and to be documented, and challenge is potentially there if members are not able to show that they've had that reasonably regularly, and I think an annual training is really what I would definitely be advising the committee to be implementing.
No, I totally agree. I think as well this document is going to go out to consultation, so there's an opportunity for us as members to feed into that and say that actually, I mean, Councillor Brown's made up a point, and I hope to see that in the consultation document at the end. And I think it's something that we should all be feeding into if we feel that strongly. Is there any more on that point? Moving forward. 5.2, the regulatory structure. Obviously, we're already doing what is asked. The 5.3, the fit and proper test. Any comments or questions? Nope.
Just so, well, on
Councillor Madden.
On recommendation 20, we are asked a question in relation to deciding if somebody should travel or passengers should travel with someone at night. Are there any conditions we want to put to that? Perhaps I looked at it. Perhaps Nikki could explain that one.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, this is basically looking at, there's a wider remit here, and I think you'll come on to recommendations later of how you determine that fit and properness. And it is really recognising that there's never been a definition of what fit and proper is. And you're asked to be making a decision with that definition that comes straight from the Act. And what the DFT are suggesting is that you recognise the paragraph in 5.3, that's the criteria that they would recommend that you use when you're considering applications. And again, I'll get Ben to confirm this for you as your advisor. But that is what they're saying, rather than just saying, is an individual fit and proper, that's what the licensing authority should take into account, and referencing that if at any time you are undecided whether a person should be granted a licence, then you shouldn't be granting it. If you cannot say hand on heart that you agree with the statement, then you should be looking at refusals. And really, in terms of our current PCC policy, that was just demonstrating to you at the moment what we do in looking at the criteria of fit and proper, as well as, so there's a number of factors that we will look at, as well as the general demeanour and reference that the DFT have put forward. So, and that's what the recommendation is basically saying, is that we will use that within our policies to guide you into making a decision, and for the applicants to be aware that's what you're going to take into account. Is there anything else I should add to that, Chair, via Ben?
Are you happy to add anything to that, Ben? Or
There's not really a great deal to add to that. There is case law that has vaguely sort of set out the parameters of those elements that you need to be considering, but there has been a massive push in the last few years, in particular in relation to safeguarding as to fitness of drivers, to promote the fact that the licensing authority function is to protect the public. And as Nikki's rightly said, where there is an element of doubt, then drivers ought not to be licensed, and that is very much the push of the statutory guidance and several other, such as the LGA guidance and councillor guidance as well, that makes it perfectly clear that things are becoming much more stringent in terms of the considerations for fitness to drive. But I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
do you have any questions? Councillor Madden.
Yeah, sorry, it's just I absolutely agree with the stringent native stringency, and obviously the localism bit which we talked about last week, and the concerns we have, you know, for children and all, as pointed out here. I don't know if there are any cases in the past where we have refused someone on clearly an objective decision, but based on the information in front of them where a licensing officer has refused. And the second question is, because I haven't come across any of those cases myself, I must say, but the second point is, if you are refused as a driver seeking a license, can you appeal, or is there a right to appeal?
Yeah, yes. First, I'll deal with the latter point first. Yes, there is a right of appeal to the Magistrates' Court within 21 days of the decision. Members have the...
Not to the licensing committee, to the Magistrates' Court?
That's right. So if a decision... I think what you're asking is if a delegated decision is made, is there a right of appeal? There is, and it's straight to the Magistrates' Court, because the delegated officer is acting in effect on behalf of the licensing authority when that decision is made. I'm trying to remember what the other point that you raised was. Yes, certainly the authority has revoked driver's licences and refused applications for licences. I'm aware of a case that is actually the subject of an ongoing appeal. I'm not going to speak too much about it, clearly, because it's legally sensitive, but it's certainly not unusual for these decisions to be made. They do happen, unfortunately.
And perhaps as well to add to that, to reassure members that officers will only use those delegated powers when there is a public safety issue that needs to be rectified immediately. So it would be on urgency that the officers would use that decision, but in most respects, and they are unusual, it's an exception rather than the rule, because most applications would come before the licensing subcommittee. It's only when there's a risk to the public that the officer would step in, just because of time.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions on 5.3, the fit and proper test? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Not a question as such, but actually I'd be quite happy to propose that the committee do include that paragraph. To sort of also answer Leo's question, I remember on at least one subcommittee last year we did make a determination on a licence based on asking ourselves that question. So it is something that we do use, and therefore I'm quite happy to propose that the committee incorporate it.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I have to be honest, I've used that question before in the subcommittee, so I'm quite happy for us to add that in as something that the committee would like to see in the policy and is supportive within the consultation. So we can add that to the end, but I think it's something that if the committee are in broad agreement, do we have everyone agreeing? Show of hands? Yes, yes. Councillor Madden, yeah, fine. I think that one, Nikki, is the committee are in agreement that they would actually like that to go in there anyway, but obviously into the consultation, obviously put it out to consultation, but we're pretty much agreed on that. We're going to move on to 5.4 if no one has anything else on 5.3, which is criminal convictions rehabilitation, and there is a table at the end of this which is obviously worth looking at if you want to ask any questions or comments on it. Do you have any questions or comments on criminal? Something from the office? No?
Well, just to assist members that the document has been set out is because it is going to consultation, and that consultation document will show very much the way that the table is set out at the moment. This is what DFT say, this is what we do we need to make any changes? And I think after those responses are considered, I think in the September determination policy meeting you will, I would imagine, be going through all of those criteria and saying whether you want to see any changes, and will be guided obviously by your local knowledge, by any responses and how it accords with the statutory guidance.
Do you have any comments or questions, members? No. We'll move on to section 6, which is criminality checks for drivers, which is driver licensing. Any questions or comments? No. I'll move on. 6.1, safeguarding awareness. We do that anyway. Any more questions or comments? No. 6.2, county lines exploitation. We do that anyway. Any questions or comments? No. 6.3, language. Do we have any questions or comments? No? Brilliant. Section 7, vehicle licensing. Criminality checks for vehicle proprietors. Any questions or comments? There is a change to that policy. That's the only reason I ask. No? Okay. 7.1, in-vehicle visual and audio recording, CCTV. Any questions or comments? 7.2, stretch limousines, which is Councillor Madrick's favourite form of transport. Any questions or comments? No? Section 8, private hire vehicle operating licence. 8.0, criminality checks for private hire vehicles and operators. Any questions or comments? No. 8.1, booking and dispatch staff. Any questions or comments? No. Okay. 8.2, record keeping. Any questions or comments? No. 8.3, use of passenger carrying vehicles, licensed drivers. Any questions or comments? Nope. Section 9, enforcing the licensing regime. 9.0, joint of authorisation of enforcement officers. Any questions or comments? Nope. 9.1, setting expectations and monitoring. Any questions or comments? 9.2, suspension and revocation of driver licences. Any questions or comments? Nope. Now I think there are going to be a question on this. Section 10, age limits for wheelchair accessible vehicles. Do we have any questions or comments? This is about proposing the change of the age limits from I think it's going to go up to 12 years from 8. Is there any questions at all on that, members? So everyone's happy with that proposal? Okay, the reason I'm actually probably going to ask a question on this, because what I find is we changed our policy back in December, I want to say December 2020, Nikki, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was around that period, about, obviously we did this to ensure that vehicles were going to be going into the clean air zone and were going to be compliant. Since then there have been several vehicles that have been given sunset periods because they haven't upgraded. Is there any opportunity, is there any way that sunset clause could be extended for the vehicles that aren't compliant until, because these vehicles that they are ordering take a significant amount of time to actually be built and to be delivered. So there'll be several vehicles out on the road that effectively are driving around that aren't CAS compliant, but now obviously that sunset has been, the exemption's gone. So do they have to apply on a case-by-case basis, or is there just a blanket ones for those to carry on?
The only outstanding vehicles that aren't currently CAS compliant, we are engaging with them on a one-to-one basis in terms of renewing their licence. So for those vehicles, what we've asked driver or proprietors to do is to show us that they've placed an order and we've seen that order and a potential delivery date, because we know that there was delays. And because we've had that information and validation, we have been extending the use of the current vehicle until the new vehicle has come into the possession of the proprietor. So we have been doing that, Chair.
Okay. It's just also, if you make reference to deputations, there's also people asking, obviously there's an extension for wheelchair accessible, but for normal vehicles, like saloon cars, they still have the original policy of 4 and 8. Obviously, some of these vehicles that are what I would call Euro 6 CAS compliant vehicles are older than that age limit. And I'm going to give an example of one that I saw recently as a member of a subcommittee, and we see a nice vehicle that was well within the CAS compliant, but it was effectively not compliant with policy. Now that we've had our money for the clean air zone and we've been given the money for the chargers, would there be any way we could amend the policy to make Euro 6 vehicles compliant rather than the age limit?
Members, it's your policy. You're at liberty to put anything forward. What I would suggest, though, that if there would be any change, that you would seek to make that decision with the relevant information you need to evidence why it's appropriate to do that. Okay. unfortunately, I've been here for quite a few many years, and I can say to you that the older, and I think we've demonstrated this to you previously, we see a marked downturn in failure rates for vehicle inspections once a vehicle is over 8 years of age. They're not as maintained as they should be. There are exceptions. There are always exceptions to a policy, such as the matter you dealt with a couple of weeks ago, when you were satisfied that that vehicle was such an exception that you would allow it to remain. And that still stands good in terms of your policy. But to say any car can stay, on the road indefinitely, then puts a greater pressure on officers in terms of inspecting vehicles more often, and that the travelling public may be sitting in cars that have seen better days. 12 years of full-time work, I don't know whether I've got into a taxi sometimes and the upholstery has seen better days, or the car is starting to look old and tired and worn, and is that that's a matter for committee to say, are you happy to have vehicles of that age working 100,000 miles a year still on your fleet of licensed vehicles? Is that what you want to see?
No, I understand that, and thank you. I think I'm more getting to the point of vehicles that slip through the net effectively when it comes to being clean air zone compliant, because there is, I think, vehicles over an 18-month span that will slip through from when our policy has been implemented to when those vehicles were purchased. But that's all I'm getting at, and that would be one for the drivers to represent in their consultation effectively, and I think that's what we're asking. But I think what I'm saying is I'm preempting the fact that we've had, I think, 18 people sent in written deputations very, very quickly. So I anticipate that we're going to have the similar sort of discussion going through the consultation. So I think it's probably worth, my recommendation to you as licence manager is to have that information ready to hand for when the consultation comes back. Do we have any more questions on that? No, okay, I'll move on from that. After you.
Can I just apologise, because I didn't cover that as a specific section to members when we were looking at the best practice guidance. So it might help to, if I can just say, in terms of the wheelchair accessible vehicles, the issue is obviously that the taxi trade particularly, because they use wheelchair accessible vehicles, our policy for certain vehicles is they must be wheelchair accessible. And during the CAS consultation and CAS funding, a lot of comments were made, and I don't know they were made to you as members, is that the cost of wheelchair accessible vehicles far exceed the cost of normal saloon type vehicles, and they were concerned, and there were concerns raised that would we see a reduction because of the expense of those vehicles in having vehicles that are suitable for wheelchair accessibility. So this recommendation really ties in with looking at provision of sufficient transport in the city for those that will need those sorts of vehicles to travel, and so we don't see a deterioration in the fleet and will encourage more wheelchair accessible vehicles to come on to be licensed.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Do we have anything else anyone wants to add to the report? Yeah.
One minor thing, that's all.
Sorry, say that again, Councillor Madden.
A minor thing. It's
Oh, go on.
37.
Absolutely.
If you look at page 87,
Yep, I'm on there.
all the recommendations of delegation, who's going to be delegated to, we've just left out 37, that's all. If that could be added in. Now, could I suggest, when we go back to page 62, and we have paragraphs 1, 2 and 1, 3 on how we're going to consult. I would suggest that they come out of that and into a covering letter. Otherwise, people might just pick this up and not, give them. So I suggest, but that's only a suggestion. You can take it or leave it. But I think I'd rather have a document with a letter saying this is the consultation process.
A covering letter to say this is a consultation process. After you, yeah, please.
What's intended, and I'm happy to take any advice from or views that We were looking at doing an online electronic, mainly through SurveyMonkey, so we would then be able to highlight those sections of the recommendations that are due or recommended for change, so that we can get drivers or proprietors or any other interested parties to comment on those proposals. Certainly we can have this information on our web pages as well, but the proposals we are going to email each driver electronically as well, and driver, proprietor, operator, to let them know of these proposed changes, and to engage with the process as much as possible.
Just a small recommendation from me on the back of what Councillor Madden said. We had I'm not going to name the officer who did the work, but we had an officer who did a lot of work with the taxi trade recently about getting funding for them. It might be prudent to engage that officer who already has strong relationships with the trade, especially with, I think, doing some excellent work that I've never seen done before. So I would recommend doing that as well. I'm sure you're going to come on to that.
I very much hope there could be that collaboration between services, and certainly I think that would be an excellent suggestion, Chair. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Councillor Weems.
It's only really about the length of the consultation, so I realise it's 8 weeks. Most government consultations seem to run from 12 or more. I'm just aware that in August a lot of people go on holiday, so they might not have the opportunity to actually respond to the consultation effectively. So, and then another question I just want to ask is, when are you advertising it? So if you're advertising it from the 1st of August, there might be a delay in people being actually able to see the consultation being put forward. So I just wanted to know if maybe we could extend it to 12 weeks and then we can have that data set.
Yeah, absolutely, no objections. I think the 8 weeks was mentioned because most of the recommendations are for us to accord with statutory guidance, and obviously the consultation on wheelchair accessible vehicles, there may be an interest in the trade for that to be considered by your service as soon as possible. But if a 3-month consultation will enable greater communication and a greater feedback, then absolutely we can extend it to end of October.
I mean, I have no issue with that if members are happy, but if that is a recommendation from the floor just to amend the actual recommendation, I'm happy to take that.
Yeah, I just don't want to get to in a scenario where some people come back and say, well, I didn't see this consultation, I had no knowledge of it.
Are you proposing that we...
Yeah, I'm happy to propose that.
Propose that that's from August the 1st to the 31st of October?
Yes.
Just want to second it. I've got Councillor Swan at the back who's put his hand up very quickly. So we'll go to that at the end, but we're going to finish off first. Is there anything else that we want to add? Okay, the only thing I'm going to mention is on 3.4, which deals with the issue of livery. I hope that that actually puts some real teeth to the bones of what we're actually trying to do, because, I mean, with livery, there have been no real harsh penalty for people that are straying from the policy. Hopefully now, after the third time of doing it, they're going to have permanent fixed livery. So fingers crossed that people actually do start playing by the rules. And if they have a vehicle that doesn't take livery, or will not take the magnetics, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have permanent livery. And that's how we're looking to do this moving forward. Do we have any comments on the recommendations, and should we take the amendment from Councillor Weems and vote on this now? Please say anything before, because I'm going to go to the vote otherwise. So the amendment with Councillor Weems, all those in favour, please show. Brilliant. Thank you. That concludes today's Licensing Committee.